Okay, so I've got here this another perspective set up from this model, which I want to start to work with in 3ds Max. And I've been showing you that you can use these sweet workflow options to transfer your file into 3ds Max. But what you'll find after a little while when you try to update the links, if you've used this option, it can be a little bit fiddly. So a better option, once you've got a bit more experience, is to just directly export to this FBX format. But before you do that, what you should really do is go into Max, so make sure you've got 3ds Max open, and then set a project folder. And just like you work with InDesign or your other graphics programs, it helps if you keep all of the resources that you're working, especially with 3D programs, all in the one location. And so making a project folder with 3ds Max will help you with that. And when you open 3ds Max, you'll see next to the workspace button at the top, there's a little button that looks like a folder icon, I suppose. Click there, and then you can easily set your own project folder. And it's as simple as browsing. So I'm going to browse to my folder for this subject, and then choosing a folder. Now, I've got a folder here for this whole subject. I want to make a folder for this project. You've got a little button here that will make a new folder, but there are a few little issues with that I just thought I'd show you. So I'm going to call this, well, let's say Hub 2016. Oh, it's worked this time. Okay, sometimes it'll just, you know how sometimes when you make a new folder, it'll say new folder, and it won't update straight away, so you just got to click away sometimes to get it to update. So make sure it says the new name when you select it, and if I click OK, there we are. So that's set my project folder, and I'll just show you what that's done. Now back into here, there's the folder I just made, and notice it's made all of these little subfolders. And so it can even help to make a folder then for your Revit file, and I'm going to do that. So I'm just going to make a new folder here and call it Revit in nice big letters so it's easy to see. And that way you can keep all the 3D things together. You can put the AutoCAD things in here as well if you're using AutoCAD. And so now, before I go to export my Revit file, I'm going to go and save that, of course, as a project file to the same place. And I might give it a new name even. Okay, so this way I know everything's in that one folder. And then when I go to export and then FBX, you can see it's prompting me for a location. So I can go there to, I can do it in the Revit folder, or I can go to import, which is the folder that Max likes you to use. And I'll just leave everything else on the default. So I'm going to just click save there. And now I'll show you what that's done. So going to import, you can see there I've got this FBX file in my import folder. This is where it gets interesting. If I go now to 3ds Max, and then I'm going to go to import and then link FBX. And then no, it should go straight to my project folder anyway. It will after I do this. So I'm just going to browse anyway to that folder, choose the FBX file, open, and I might change the option there to combine by Revit family type. Everything else I'll just leave on the default. Attach the file. And any messages that I get there, I'm just going to say yes. Okay, so now, if I show you that import folder, you can see, as well as that FBX file, it's made a folder. And that's where all the resources are. So you'll often find when you're linking these files together, you might be missing textures and things like that, similar to InDesign when you have links missing. And so I can just show you there, we've got all of the material textures grouped together nicely. And so then I'll close this. I can go ahead and do my work in 3ds Max, and I will do a save as, of course, and just save as again, and there you can see it's already in the scenes folder in the project folder I've just made. So I can just give it a name. So that way, if I need to move to another computer, I can simply copy that whole HUD 2016 folder, and it should have everything I need in that folder, instead of putting it into places I don't know. Okay, so just the last thing I'll show you there. We've seen this a million times. C for camera will set the camera view that I had in Max into my that I had in Revit into my Max viewport. And well, if you're still getting used to rendering with Max, it's probably good to just try and render and see what you get. When you first import, it'll do something, but probably not what you want. So do you remember what you need to change to get it to render? If we go into Revit, I'll just show you here. If I go to, well, it's on exterior side only. If I go to interior, artificial only, it will render something. And so you can see I've got all these lights in the ceiling there. So do you remember what you need to do to get it to render in a similar way in 3ds Max? There are two things you want to be thinking about, really. You've got the lighting and the exposure. So the lighting can be an issue, and you might need to check that. And here with Revit, it's a bit more automatic because you can just choose the option here to have sun or artificial. But it's not that much more complicated in Max, and I'll show you how to do that. And then the other option, exposure, will affect your brightness. So just like when you're taking a photo, the amount of light coming into your camera, of course, affects the appearance of your render. So what I'm really trying to encourage you to do is try to render with these different tools, because particularly if you're planning on doing rendered animation, you'll need to use 3ds Max. But also, if you want more control over your render, you need to still probably render locally. And I know a lot of you will be relying on the cloud to do many of your renders, but I'd be looking at that as a fallback. So it's a good option to have, but the renders all look very similar, and so when the assessors see a whole string of very similar looking cloud renders, they'll assess it accordingly. And also, it's much more automated, so you don't get that much control over the renders done in the cloud. It's a different rendering engine to either Mental Ray or the ART renderer, or even Arnold. It's yet another rendering engine, and it is very automated. Now you can see that's taking a while. I thought it was on, since it was on draft, it would render pretty quickly, but I think because I'm doing a few things, that's going a bit slowly, so I don't think I'll wait for that. But I think, okay, just because the processor is being used by the Max renderer. I'm used to having a few more cores than this. But anyhow, that's rendered. I can see something, at least we know it's working. But I'll show you how to quickly get the lights working. Here we go now, Revit's chugging away. And it should speed up and give us a render pretty quickly now, so I might just let that do its thing. So anyhow, while that's happening, I'll just remind you, if you missed it earlier, Arnold, which I know a lot of you looked at in your research assignment, is going to be available for 3ds Max. It already is for people who've got a commercial license. I've just downloaded it, and I'm actually buying a new computer this weekend so that I can play around with it over the holidays. So it does require pretty decent hardware, but I think it's an exciting thing because Arnold is, I think, great new technology, and having it part of the as part of the Autodesk suite is a great thing for everyone because you can all use those Autodesk programs. Soon, yeah, not it's definitely not there yet, but yeah, it should be eventually. One trick actually, if you try to download Maya, and then you can try to get your models into there if you want to play around with Arnold. Maya already has it, but for 3ds Max you need a special plugin. So there we go. So I can see, with Revit, if I go and adjust the exposure, it's not an amazing render, but it's showing me something, and I can obviously see that the lights are working. So to get something similar in Max, that should be your starting point. I've got the sun there. It's not too bad actually, and the background. So I might leave those this time and just show you how to turn the lights on the Tools menu. You can go to the Light Lister, and I can see there the sun and the sky are turned on, but my other lights aren't. So I'm just going to tick next to those. All of these lights that you can see on the ceiling there come in as one instance. So don't worry if you don't see an entry for each one, that's just because they're identical. So I just need to tick both of those, and the down light there is actually, what is it? The 38 lights that I have in that ceiling. And so again, remember the other option is exposure. So if I go to rendering and then exposure control, and I'm just going to do a render preview here. Okay, so this is of course still using Mentoray, and I think Mentoray is still a great engine. You can do a lot with it. Okay, so even rendering the preview can take a little while, but it's much faster than doing a full render. So while that's happening, I'll just quickly show you again some Arnold things. So I think just the real-time stuff in Arnold, also it's not there, it's on this one. So doing the real-time active shade. So being able to just that quickly get updates to your render, which V-Ray is actually pretty good for this as well, but it's definitely not as fast as that. I think he's got a pretty good graphics card there. But still, that's pretty amazing for active viewports, or active shade. Okay, so there we are. So that's done my preview. You can see it's still fairly dark. If I use the exposure value there, that will increase the brightness as I reduce that exposure value. Now, it is becoming a bit too bright with the sun and the sky. So I can go back to Tools and then Light Lister. And I might just try turning the sun and the sky off, because that's what I had in Revit. I had artificial only. So remember, you've got the sun, of course, as a light source, but the sky is also a light source. So the blue sky, you can see it, it's bright blue, and that does provide a lot of light to your environments or to your scenes. So I'm going to turn that off though, because we want a nighttime style render. And then back in this exposure panel, there's also what's called a physical sky, which also provides light. So I'm just going to turn off that use map option. So just up the top here in that exposure panel, or environment and effects it's called, just above where it's got that environment map, you can just untick that use map option. So just up the top there. So you want that on for daytime renders, but usually for nighttime renders you don't need it. So you can see it's going a little bit faster now as well, even though I've got a lot of interior lights. The skylight and the environment map will slow it down quite a bit. Okay, so now I can see it's very dark, but by reducing the exposure value even more, then I can see the effect of those lights, and that's looking very similar to what I had in Revit, but maybe slightly better quality. And so maybe I'll just show you one little trick to maybe get you more interested in using Max for rendering. Because you've probably seen that light sources, I've shown you this before, but I'll show you again. Light sources in Revit often don't glow, so they look like they're coming from a pit of blackness if they're a recessed light, and you've got to put maybe a sheet of glass in there and make it self-illuminated to get that glowing effect. And that's extra work, and you've got to still play around to get the right look anyway. What you can do with a light in Max is simply turn on the option down here. Now, just so it's clear, I've already selected the lights in the Tools menu. When I went to the light lister, I clicked on the square button there just next to the light, which is a quick way of selecting those lights. So that light lister is fantastic. It's not only giving you a list of all of your lights, but an easy way to select them, just with that button over on the left there. So I've got 38 lights selected, but I can just edit them as a group now. And then down at the bottom of this panel, I'm going to set the emit from shape to a disk. And then I'm going to simply, I'll leave the size, no, I'll make it a little bit smaller. 130 is a bit big. So I'm going to make it about 75 mil. That might even be too big, but that's okay. And so then I'm going to tick this option here, light shape visible when rendering. That's it. And then render. Okay, so you can see already probably the quality is better than Revit, even though this is still just a draft render in 3ds Max. It's rendering a bit faster as well. And of course, the lights, instead of being those pits of blackness, or black holes, I've got clearly visible light sources. Oh, of course, yeah. So to save a render, just click on this disk icon, and you can save it as in any format you like, JPEG, or we'll look at doing XRs and more advanced formats later. But first, JPEGs and PNGs and TIFFs, so are fine. Okay, so I'll finish that one there, but what I'll do next is then come back to Revit and maybe look at doing detail modelling and refining your model a bit more, which is obviously going to have a big impact on your rendering. And also we can look at ways of getting more complex lights set up, starting with Revit, but you probably then need to do a lot of the extra work for that in Max, and then we can carry across into Max and go into more modelling techniques that you can use there as well to get things that you can't do very easily with Revit. It's often detailed things. I mean, if you think about maybe something like this where I've got a bar that I'm trying to visualise, you might have just, wine bottles or glasses, all that sort of extra stuff that you don't need to show in your Revit drawings. You don't need that in your plans, definitely, or your sections, but you probably want to see that in perspective, and you can easily have those as separate 3D models that you just bring into your Max file. Okay, so you can see that slowing down a little bit. I won't wait for that to finish, but I'll come back to show you some more things with both those programs afterwards.